For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, episode 45 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Thanks for tuning in. Today's episode is with Jeff Lund. Jeff is the host of the Mediocre Alaskan Podcast. Make sure you go check that podcast out. He's also an author. His recent book, A Miserable Paradise, Life in Southeast Alaska. I've really enjoyed that one. I'm about halfway through it at the moment. He's a teacher, an angler, a hunter, outdoorsman, and fancies himself a fan of basketball as well. So that's who's on the show today, but also want to mention if you're a fan of this show, please make sure you're subscribed to Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. We have new podcasts dropping every first and third Friday of the month, so 2 episodes every month. Also go check out buffaloroamer.com. Lots of fun and cool stuff there. Without further ado, Jeff Lund of the Mediocre Alaskan Podcast on Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Happy to have Jeff Lund on the podcast today. Jeff, don't know a ton about you, so it'll be fun to chat about Alaska and about the outdoors. And I was poking around your blog a little bit, the Mediocre Alaskan, and found a lot of really good stuff on there. And I think similar sentiment to a lot of my feelings and rumblings around in the woods. So yeah, thanks for reaching out and looking forward to chatting a bit.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's one of the cool things about having a podcast is like reaching out and meeting new people who are doing interesting things. So it's pretty fun to reach out and then also, just connect with people. Absolutely.
It's one of the biggest pluses that positives that I've been able to get from the podcast just personally, other than putting it out, is connecting with cool people, interesting folk. And the best part about it is it's my podcast, or when you're on the Mediocre Alaskan, it's your podcast. So whatever sounds interesting, you get to talk about. So when you get a random DM about, hey, I live in Alaska, I like to hunt, you want to talk? Yeah, sweet. Let's do it.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So tell me a little bit about Jeff Lund and the Mediocre Alaskan, and just give me a rundown of kind of your podcast or your life as the Mediocre Alaskan.
Okay. Grew up on Prince of Wales Island in Southeast Alaska. My family moved there when I was 5. They were both teachers. And so grew up on Prince of Wales. We call it the Rock, 3rd largest island in the U.S., but maybe 5,000 to 6,000 people. So a lot of land, a lot of opportunity for the outdoors. That's pretty much all we could do. Became very self-sufficient and be very good at entertaining ourselves outside, mostly fishing, but hiking around, a lot of fun. Went to college in Arizona for all the reasons you'd expect. It was warm, dry, lots of people, great athletic program. So got a job teaching in California after graduated college, and then moved back to Alaska in 2023 or 2013, not 2023, it hasn't happened yet, in 2013, and teach here in Ketchikan, and started a podcast to complement my column that I have in a newspaper. And it was just kind of fun to do long form interviews and discussions and talk about a lot of different things. Sometimes when you're writing a column, there's just more that you have to say, or you have to focus on one little part of the story, and you don't have the freedom to be able to talk about all aspects of it, or go off on tangents, or talk to people and get that full context. So I really enjoyed that and just started it for the sake of starting it. And I call it the Mediocre Alaskan Podcast because I didn't want to be that person who pretends to be or puts up a facade and says that they're the expert. I think a lot of people try to be the the biggest and the baddest and prove themselves, when, the reality is we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to screw up. We're all going to, miss shots or forget the license or, break an oar. It's just going to happen. And so I wanted to be truthful. I obviously feel that I'm competent in a lot of different areas, but it's just fun to tell things the way they are. I read a lot of Bill Heavey and Patrick McManus growing up. And so I just love that sort of attitude of having so much fun in the outdoors, but not having to have it be 100% results based. And then also provide an Alaska by Alaskans perspective that you don't always get. A lot of people come up here and they write their chapter of the Alaskan experience, which is awesome. I love reading about people because it makes it, very new to me again. And I realize how great it is to live here when someone comes up and hasn't been here before, and they're so enthralled by the eagles. And I'm thinking, oh, well, I see those all the time. It's not a big deal. On the drive home, I saw some whales, just not a big deal, but for people who don't get that every day, it's a wonderful thing and a great reminder for us who live here that this is beautiful. And so I definitely appreciate the voice of people who come up here and visit, but also wanted to provide one of a year round so people know what it's like when it's not tourist season.
Awesome, man. I love it. And I love the perspective, particularly of the first part of, it's so easy, and we're all guilty of it, right? Like, I love an amazing man versus nature story. Like, I'm the first one to grab Into Thin Air or whatever it may be, and go for that Everest type moment. But the reality of the tripping that I enjoy, that I do, that I think is common amongst more people is, it's not man versus nature. It's about, personal experiences and oftentimes growth and all these things that we go to nature for, not to try and bag a peak in the fastest amount of time or have the biggest bear or whatever it might be. It's nice to be able to expose some of those more. It's not even that it's mundane, but it's just not so maybe self-righteous, I guess.
Yeah. You said Into Thin Air, which is good. I'm glad you mentioned that one. There is also another book called Into the Wild. What are your thoughts on that one? I teach adventure survival literature for high school kids up here, and we read Into Thin Air and read Into the Wild. So did you not bring up Into the Wild because I'm Alaskan and you think I would have a...
No, the reason I said Into Thin Air is because for me, it is one of those... it's a double-edged sword because it's an amazing story. Like, I remember the first time I read it, it was like I couldn't put it down. But it's not maybe emblematic of the realities of the pleasure and joy that I get from, a canoe trip or whatever it might be. But the Into the Wild story is kind of the same thing, I think. And I'm sure with your Alaskan background, there's a whole bunch of baggage to unpack with that one, right?
Yeah. I love the Into Thin Air too. And just looking at, as that younger person, more in the younger middle age type area, when you look at, Beck Weathers being on that opposite side of there, how climbing is what made that black cloud go away. And we think about, are we doing certain things just to not deal with reality? Are we trying to just, make this resume of a life, but it's just covering the emptiness? And so we have some really good discussions about that. But the Into the Wild and Grizzly Maze are both two things that kids talk a lot about. And it's very understandable to impressionable teenagers, especially in lower 48. When I was in California, I was teaching, the kids loved the book because this guy's got it figured out. And almost every single kid up here is like, this guy's a moron. This guy's an idiot. This guy was a mooch. Like, he was not prepared. He was not respectful. I don't know why anybody would want to go there and camp in a bus where someone died. But it's the idea of having the stones to pursue that and find something and have the courage to do that. And that's so appealing to people who have grown up and have had, such strict rules, and they haven't had any sort of nature, and they want to be free of all that. And so there's a lot of symbolic freeing in that I have to explain to the Alaska kids who are like, why would you want to do that, man? Like, this is just crazy. Just go out there and have fun.
100%. And I'm sure it's kind of a good juxtaposition, if I could pronounce that word, to Alaska from a lower 48's perspective in general, right? Because, which I think is a unique perspective for you, is that, Alaska is the land of opportunity, right? It's the last frontier. It's all this amazing stuff. And, I love Alaska, and you talk about Alaska, and it brings so many memories to so many people, especially in the lower 48. But for somebody who is there and lives it, I'm sure it's a little bit of both, right? It's easy to see that perspective, but as you mentioned, the other end of it is the reality of, maybe the guy was a kook, or not everybody. I guess I'm not entirely sure what I'm trying to get at, but I think you understand the sentiment.
Yeah. It's, every time that we have a season that we have, multiple people who have to get rescued on hikes and things like that. And so, we read about it in the papers, and the Coast Guard is out there. It's just so much more severe here. And I think people don't appreciate that or realize that. They think that nature is something that can be conquered, that can be bagged, and it's super dangerous. And we want people to come up here and enjoy it, but we also want people to respect the fact that nature doesn't care whatsoever. It just is. And to really respect that is to enjoy it and appreciate it, but also, not have to get rescued by the Coast Guard to put other people at risk when you're coming up here doing whatever.
Two other things, tangent, but kind of tied together with this thought is, one of my takeaways from some of my trips in Alaska, being a lower 48 born and bred, is when I was on the Yukon River in particular and stopping in some of the villages along the river, it was instilled to me, and I finally got a clear perspective of wilderness is not, we think of wilderness as being pristine, untouched land with no human involvement. You go to the Grand Canyon or whatever, a national park, Yosemite, whatever it may be, and it's all this pristine, amazing stuff, and we want to keep it that way with no human involvement. But the reality of wilderness is people are human, or people are part of that system. People are part of nature, and people have been living as a vital part of that ecosystem for millennia, right? So, to think that humans haven't played an impact in that nature is just not true. And I think for me, that perspective was clear and kind of instilled visiting some of those villages along the river, where they're it's easy to come in and say, oh, no trapping, no fishing, no this. And we do need all of those balances. But at the same time, there is an understanding that people, we are part of the natural world,
Yeah. And that's, I think, overwhelmingly the amount of people who come up here, they really enjoy it. They appreciate it and love it. It's just that smaller contingent who don't have the respect for it that end up getting the biggest headlines. But, you see what other people have done. I met my wife when she was up here. She's from Lexington, Massachusetts, and she was getting her PhD at University of Wyoming. And she came to Alaska to kayak Glacier Bay and to hike the Chilkoot Trail, stuff that I've never done. I'm just man, that is awesome, and then you floating down the Yukon River, that's something that I haven't done. I've been near the Yukon, and I've hunted caribou in negative 30 degrees up near Fairbanks, but sometimes it takes that lower 48 person, that other person who is really looking to do something awesome in Alaska, that reopens your eyes as the local to, hey, this is right here. This is something that I can do. And this is something that I should do. I can't take this stuff for granted. And it's cool to see people come up here and really appreciate that and put other things on the map. But again, the double-edged sword is you are doing and bringing attention to something that might increase the traffic, which is such a bizarre thing. Talking about Alaska and talking about the hunting and the fishing, I'm inherently maybe bringing attention to more people that might be, maybe I go out fishing this year for king salmon and someone else is on a rental boat because I've talked about it. And, I don't want to make myself sound big or anything like that, but that's the, reality. You say you have a great time on this hike, and next time you go, maybe someone else is there and you're like, oh man, all these people. But if you write about it, podcast about it, you're showing appreciation, but you're also contributing to the crowding. So it's, I don't know, I guess we're all hypocrites on some level.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And it's, I know exactly what you mean. I think the same thing, I thought the same thing recently for the first time for myself. I do a lot of podcasts about the Mississippi River because I also paddled the Mississippi, and I love the Mississippi. It like flows through my veins. So if somebody wants to talk about paddling the Mississippi River, it's like, yeah, it's, that's my bread and butter. I love talking about it. But I've also know that I've influenced several people, which is awesome to do it. But then I look back, I'm like, I wonder if in 10, 15 years, the Mississippi is going to be like the Appalachian Trail or whatever, or the Into the Wild for Alaska people. But what can you do? It's a double-edged sword, but I'm not going to stop talking about it because it's an amazing resource that is underutilized. So whatever,
Yeah. And you're obviously not the first person talking about it. I'm not the first person who started a podcast who's been freelance writing about Alaska. So, the blame is not exclusively with me or you. And so I think another thing that comes with it is the desire to then protect it and the awareness of this is what we have right there.
Sorry, hey, hang on 1 second with me, Jeff, here. Okay, I think we're back and running. Curious, similar tangent, but I'm curious about your introduction into hunting. Obviously, growing up at Prince of Wales, I imagine hunting and fishing, as you said, as a kid, was kind of a way of life. But
we just really never got into it, which was pretty crazy. We just lived at the river, and it was so much fun. But now, since I've moved back and started, I didn't really start hunting until I moved back. You get to see everything on a different scale. When you're younger, it's just about going to the river and kind of having fun. But then you start to see, okay, let's pay attention to the populations. How can my wife and I catch fish and hunt deer and live sustainably, and let's eat less beef and let's have more venison. So it's pretty fun to be able to do that. But then you also look at what your impact is, and it's a good feeling to feel like in tune to that and kind of have that different level of understanding of the way things are, the way things work. And, you pay attention to the amount of snow that's up top, because if you don't have a good snow year, you're not going to have a lot of snow melt that's going to keep the rivers up in August. And so while I don't want snow because it sucks to drive in, we need the snow on the mountains to make sure the rivers have enough water in them for the fish to spawn. So you get in better tune with all of the cycles of the entire year and everything, rather than just there are fish around, let's go catch them. It's all right, the snow up on top does this, too much snow down low, makes it more difficult for the deer. And then if there's a ton of snow, then the wolves can just run on top and they can get the deer. So you just get a whole big ecosystem lesson the more that you pay attention to that sort of stuff. And it's pretty cool to have it all right here. Like, you don't have to go somewhere or read about it. You can really just kind of see it and experience it.
Do you have a memorable hunt, a most memorable hunt that comes to your mind since you've gotten back into the world?
I would say the most memorable is probably the caribou hunt last March in Fairbanks, just because it was -30 and we were going around on snow machines. And that was just so different. The hunting down here for blacktail and for black bears, it's August, September, so it's warm. You're going to the alpine. And then for rut hunting deer, it's more rain. Southeast Alaska is a lot more comparable to like a Seattle type climate. So we don't get extreme cold. We get maybe a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks of temperatures below 20. Very rarely gets into the single digits. If it is, it's just for a day. So to be out all day when it's -30 was just something else. I had all the warm stuff I could get, and then getting the caribou and just that barren landscape was just amazing and so beautiful, but in a very harsh, you can't screw this up because there are really, really big consequences here type way.
How does a caribou hunt like that go down?
It was a resident only hunt for the 40-mile herd. The 40-mile herd, which is near the Fairbanks area, it was down to 7 to 10,000, I think, in the 70s. And then through quality management, and the state here does a really good job of managing wildlife. And so in the 80s, it was starting to recover, but in the 90s, they did a better job of predator control and making sure and managing not only the predators, but also the habitat, and then paying attention to, try to get as accurate accounts as they can. And so the population has recovered to over 80,000. And so now there are two hunts. The first hunt is a quota hunt of, I think it's 3,000 or 5,000, and that's in September. And so they shut that down so that you can't have too many people that are up there tearing up the tundra with four-wheelers and things like that. So protect the habitat. And then they open it back up again for the winter season when there's snow on top of on the tundra, so that when you're driving around on the snow machine, you're not tearing it up. And so it's just a great example of managing a good resource, and it's just fun. So
and so basically you're on snow machines. I assume do you have a base camp, or you're just basically tracking down where the caribou herd is at a particular time?
Because it was a local hunt, you don't have a lot of the same pressure that people who've drawn tags and are going out there. And so I flew up to Fairbanks, and my buddy Harrison lives up there, and he drove us out. He has a truck and a little trailer, had two snow machines. So we drove out of town about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then you just kind of park at a little pullout, and you just go in these little 5 to 10 mile circuits, and you're looking for anything. If you don't see anything, you kind of loop back, go down to the next pullout. And so I think we hit 4 or 5 pullouts. We did maybe 60, 70 miles on the snow machines, and we hadn't seen anything. And you don't want to glass too much. You don't want to just go 15 miles in one direction, because it's just, could be a total waste. And so you're looking for stuff that's closer to the road.
All of this, sorry to interrupt, all of this just as for the picture in my head too, at whatever the temps you're talking about, going, 30, 40 miles an hour on a snow machine at minus 30. That sounds cold.
Yeah. Any sort of skin, like, you have to make sure that it's covered. And there's at one point that there was a small little gap on my cheek, and it was exposed, but I didn't feel it. Like, it was like an almost an instant type freeze. And my buddy said, hey, you got to pull that up a little bit so you don't get the frostbite. So you kind of rip around a little bit, then you get back to the truck, put the snow machines back on the trailer, go to the next thing. And we had quit for the day. We were going to head back, and we see a guy, and he's got 2 caribou, and there's a couple other trucks there. They'd obviously found a bit. And so we roll down the window and say, hey, you find some caribou? And the guy looks at us and says, you guys have a pot to boil water for coffee? And like, yeah. So he says, all right. The caribou were that way about 3 miles. So we gave him the pot to boil the water, and then we had to hustle. So we unloaded the snow machines. And as we were driving out there, we just kind of followed their tracks. We saw that the couple had split off from the herd. There's 7 or 8 of them. And so shot our 2, got them back to the truck right as the sun was setting. And the cool thing too is that guy stuck around. Like, he and his buddies they'd fully made it back, and there was 3 or 4 trucks there, I think. And they didn't go back into town, and they made sure that we got back to our truck too, since we were heading back pretty late. But that element in hunting doesn't happen a whole lot. And I think part of that was A, it's the local hunt, and B, it's let's look after these fellow hunters, because if something does happen, you're not surviving overnight when it's negative 30. So got back to the truck and driving back into town, and it was so cold that when there's a little bit of a gap in the door, and you're working on these animals, and you get back. So like, I was sweating a little bit, which was kind of scary, because if snow machine breaks down and you're sweating, you're just going to freeze to death. So there's a little bit of constant condensation between my outer layer and then the puffy pants I had in between. So when I took off the outer layer, we're in the truck, we had the heat full blast, but down by my ankle, that moisture just froze stiff. I couldn't feel it. But when we got out at this roadhouse to have a little snack, it just totally frozen. I thought, man, that's just crazy. That's wild. But Northern Lights were going psycho, and it was just a beautiful, awesome, legit Alaska experience.
That's cool, man. So as you're looking for these caribou, you're looking for little sections that break off of this theoretical 80,000 head herd.
Yeah, they there's 80,000 in the whole herd, but they broke off into, you have bits of a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there.
Okay.
I think during the summer you can have them congeal a little bit more into like a thousands or so when they're really migrating. But at this point, they're just kind of hunkering down. They're not moving too much. They're looking at the windswept tops of some of these hills where the lichen is exposed on the rocks, and that's what they're eating to sustain themselves through the winter. So yeah, you're just kind of looking around, looking for anything moving, do a little bit of glassing, and then kind of move on. It's kind of a drive-by type atmosphere because you don't want to sit out there for too long, especially if nothing's there. You got to move, cover ground.
One of my top 3 for sure wildlife moments was in the Brooks Range backpacking. We hit a caribou migration up there. I don't know what the name of the herd is, but it was massive. We were following 2 things about it that stick out to me. One was, of course, it was horrible mosquitoes all before we ran into the caribou migration. And like a day or 2 before we actually laid eyes on the migration, all the mosquitoes disappeared. And we're like, this is so strange, but thank God, this is amazing. And then sure enough, 2 days later, we end up running into the migration, and you can just see 2 things. You can see like the thousands of caribou filling this valley, and it was just like one of the most magnificent. It reminded me of I don't know if you've ever seen Lord of the Rings. There's a scene where, I've never thought about this until now, but there's a scene where Gandalf leads all of his troops down to like a big battle in the end, and like all of the horses are just pouring down this valley, and it looked exactly like that. And of course the migration had sucked all the mosquitoes away too, so they had drawn all the mosquitoes. But yeah, man, those caribou are like something magnificent. They're pretty amazing.
Yeah. Did you do that on the same trip as the Yukon? So you did Yukon Float and Brooks Range, or 2 separate ones?
Yeah, 2 separate trips. Yep. The Brooks Range was a 45-day backpacking trip, and that was through a summer camp here in the lower 48 when I was based out of Wisconsin when I was, I guess it would have been 18. And then the Yukon just was on my own with a buddy.
Nice. Yeah, I'm going to a buddy of mine are heading up there to hunt the Hall Road for caribou with archery. So that'll be pretty fun. But that'll be the first time I've been up there when it's been really nice. I've been up there actually 3 times, twice for basketball when it was just brutally cold. Just horrible. Not at all fun. And you're up there for coaching basketball. So it's not, you're there for basketball.
Right.
But it'd be nice to be able to be up there for that fun adventure.
Absolutely. It's an amazing place. I'm my heart's set to go back for sure. In fact, I've already texted a buddy. We'd like to do plan a pack rafting trip up there, either on the Alatna or something, up there next summer. So that's on the list, man. That place definitely calls me back.
Yeah. I hear the Charlie River is a pretty fun float. It can be a little bit gnarly in spots, but the Charlie down at the Yukon is something that people definitely look at doing.
I'll check it out. That's for sure. Interested in your writing, and obviously you're a teacher and a podcaster, but you do a lot of writing as well. You currently have a book out, I noticed, and you do a lot of freelance articles and such. Where does that passion come from, and what's your, not motive, but I guess what's your MO as far as writing?
I went to college for journalism, but I was mostly interested in sports. And then once I graduated and got a job teaching, I was hanging out outside and doing stuff, and so I wanted to write a column. Thought about writing for the newspaper, and so had an outdoor column when I was living in California, and then came back and same thing. And I think if you are a writer, you always toy with the writing a book at some point. Like if you're a runner, you have to run a marathon. You can't run a half marathon. You have to run a full marathon. If you do think you're going to run a half marathon, that's going to be it. You're going to finish the half marathon. You're going to eat a ton of food. You're going to think, well, I got to run a full. So I think it's the same thing with writing. You write a column or you get some freelance stuff done and you think about, all right, well, do I want to go articles? Do I want to sell stuff and eventually do a book? And so I set off to write 5,000 words per month for the year of 2020 to just get this is what it's like. And so it ends up being this memoir of 2020 with no hindsight. I finished the month and edited the month and did very little to it afterwards. There are a couple of times when I was in August, September, and we're getting more information about everything. And I look back at what I wrote in March and April, and I was like, but I wanted to protect the kind of time capsule-ness of it. And so the vast majority of those chapters, that the month is the chapter. Most of it is just essays about outdoors, fishing, hiking, hunting, whatnot. But then the last little bit, I talk about teaching during the pandemic and kind of what's going on. And we had the social unrest in June and July. So a little bit of that, but mostly outdoors, living through Ketchikan, or through the eyes of someone who lives in Ketchikan. So that's a miserable paradise is the title, Life in Southeast Alaska. And you can get that on Amazon, or you can go to my website and you can get that.
Awesome, man. And how did the process of training for that marathon and finally running it, how was that whole process?
It was kind of fun. Do you mean like the actual running?
Yeah, I just mean like like
metaphor for the writing of
no,
it.
No. I just mean like, obviously in retrospect now that the book is published, but as somebody who's a writer myself and, interested in the process of that type of stuff, just curious on your thoughts on, finding the finish line.
I think there's a couple of different ways to go, and I self-published, or I went through a publisher for my first book that was just kind of a collection of columns and stuff that I wrote, and it was okay. So the second one, I thought it was going to be pretty good, and I pitched it to a couple of publishers. And they're like, your writing's pretty good. We're just not really sure about it. I thought, oh man. And then it takes a while to get back from publishers too. Like sometimes it can be 6 to 8 months. So you wait 6 to 8 months and then they don't even end up getting back to you. So I thought, man, this is about 2020. I can't wait till 2023 to publish it. So I published through Amazon, had some friends edit it. And so it could probably have used another year, maybe, I guess, of fine tuning, but I thought it was, it's all kind of fresh, get it out there. But it's a fun process. You're working at it, and there are days that you feel that this is good. And there are other days where you think, man, this is awful. You get that imposter syndrome, but you just got to, keep pushing through it. Like there's nothing, I've been a freelance writer for over a decade. So I know what I'm doing. It's just a matter of having the confidence to put words to it and get after it. And it's pretty cool to have it out there. But it makes me kind of want to write another one, but we'll see.
And how about, I've always also just personally, thought like, it'd be cool to write a article as, out of just loosely, write an article for a publication that I enjoy reading. And then I sit down and I think about like, okay, what would I write? Like, I don't know if I have any interesting angle. Like, I don't want to just write about a trip. I don't want to just write about, I'm curious what your thought process is for coming up with an angle to pitch to a particular entity.
I think the biggest thing when you're writing is like, what's the point? Like your audience and your purpose. Like those are the main things. Who am I writing to, and what am I trying to say? And the confidence comes from knowing that your individual experiences can resonate with other people. We talked about there's the human element of Into Thin Air is what makes it so compelling. It's not just about the mountain. And so if you look at your experiences, you think this is not just exclusive to me. There's something that's going to resonate with other people. And so it's not that you have to be super creative. You just tell the story and be legit and be personal, and that's going to resonate with people. So I think that's the thing that I've always focused on, that I'm going to have this experience, and what am I thinking? What am I legitimately thinking about in this moment? And then how can that resonate with other people rather than try to be somebody else? If you have a favorite writer, I'm going to be John Cracker, I'm going to use his voice for this. Like, that just doesn't work. You're trying to be someone that you're not. So being honest about your experience and knowing that it's not going to sound the same, and that's probably good. You're a collection of, everybody that you've read and that you've listened to. And so that's how you develop your own unique voice, and just having the confidence to tell the story. Like, you've done some awesome things, and what's the universal thing that's going to connect with other people? So there's a difference between you writing an article about floating the Yukon River. That would be like a, personal essay that you just have for yourself versus, what's the human element? What is something that you went through? Like, and you talked about the villages that you visited, and you got some sort of insight. That's the deeper story that resonates with other people. And I think that's the thing that makes it powerful. And that's why, there's not one outdoors book. There's so many people who've written so many different stories about so many different things, or even the same thing. It's just that different perspective that resonates with people, and it connects. And that's just be honest with yourself and write it and connect.
Boom, distilled down to a 30-second tidbit. It's almost like you're a teacher.
Yeah. I teach 2 periods of journalism class, and so I go through that sort of stuff a lot.
Very good. Very good. What have been some of your favorite stories that you've told, either through writing or through your podcast?
I think for the writing, I had a lot of therapeutic moments writing about my dad who passed away from cancer. It was weird that it just never really went away. Like, it just changes you forever. And there's always like a residual something else. Like with Father's Day coming up, like the first year after he passed, just hearing the Father's Day ads, and all of a sudden, like, oh, weird. It didn't like, ruin me or, crush me or anything. I just thought, wow, that's, interesting. There's just be like a little bit more. So I think some of the ones that I've gotten the most feedback on have been just some of the ones that around Dad's birthday, or around Father's Day, that, people write in and say, this is my first year without my dad. And so even though it's been over 10 with mine, there's always something that can resonate with people, and I don't want to say help them, but I don't know, maybe they read it and they feel that they're not alone. And then the other thing is just the struggles. You go out there and you think you have everything figured out, and you just fail. And it's okay to laugh at yourself. It's okay to just think, dang it, okay, or get that perspective. I think those have been some of the things that's been fun to write about. So emotional things, getting through those things. It's okay to fail. And then I think the third thing has been kind of the hypocrisy that we've been talking about, and how it's impossible to be that no carbon footprint, writing about the outdoors and wanting to preserve it, but in the same thread, you're advertising for it. So some of those, I think, have been some of the ones I've been proud of just writing about how impossible it is to, hammer that down, and to feel that you're morally superior. Like, it's impossible, man, because there's going to be something that just contradicts you. And, you try to reduce your footprint as much as possible, but man, there's always something out there that's going to just be reminding you of just how crazy things are. So I think those are kind of the things I like writing most about.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it makes sense, especially going back to your previous answer about how to find those angles, because and it goes back to these trips and talking with people, and the podcast is it's all the human element. It's like, you go on these amazing hunts, and it's the guy who forgot his pot of coffee. That's the key of the story. It's the human element of all of this stuff that ties us together that is so intriguing too. Like you mentioned with Into Thin Air, right? It's like the mountain is there, and the mountain is the backdrop, but it's the human element that ties it all together. And it's always good to be reminded of that. And even though it's every time I do this podcast, it's always a reoccurring theme, right? This one, it's a little different. But normally the theme is people stepped up, broadly speaking. People stepped up, helped me when I was down and out on my trip. People are good, people are amazing, but it's even distilled more than that. It's just the human element that ties us all together, right?
Yeah. That's why it's fun to be encouraging of other people. I wouldn't say shocked, but the amount of people who are willing to kind of help you out with the podcast, be on the podcast, write the letters to say, hey, I enjoyed your book. I enjoyed your articles, things like that. It's fun to see just how encouraging people are when you go through these things, and you get the idea based on your social media or whatnot that everybody's just mean and at each other's throats, but that's a fraction of the truth.
Curious, I got a couple fishing buddies, two guys in particular that I think of that are like the fishiest guys I know. And I just learn so much from them. Like anytime I'm in a boat with my buddy Matt, who's been on this podcast, it's like if I have a question about fishing, like I go to him and he just knows so much. The fishiest man I know. Curious who the fishiest or the I don't know what the right term for hunting would be, but beariest, most caribou, badass, whoever. Do you have someone in your life who fills that void?
Yeah. I would say I've never hunted Dall sheep, but my buddy Tyler Friel, he writes for Outdoor Life, and he has a podcast, Tundra Talk. That guy is just all sheep all the time, but without being one of those I'm better than everyone else. Like, it's funny when you talk to him on his podcast or just listen to his podcast, he's so unassuming, but so good and dialed in. As far as deer hunting, my buddy Jesse he's next level, and he archery hunts them. It just, that he's going to get his 4 deer, and they're all going to be amazing deer. It doesn't matter what the weather or anything else throws at him. He's just on a next level, and it's fun to just be around. And you can't ask questions sometimes of people because you don't really know what to ask. And if they're going to give you tips, they don't really know what to say because they just do it. They don't really know. And there are certain things you just observe and you think, oh, I didn't even know what to ask about that. But that right there helped me so much. And that's just from their experience and being mentored by other people. So when it comes to fishing, it's kind of weird. I have a bunch of buddies who are guides, and they all fish differently, but they all catch fish. So it makes me almost think like, man, I could, if I spend 60 days every summer, I could probably figure all that stuff out too. But it's funny just how so many different methods still end up working. And a lot of times it's just like a small thing, fishing a little bit of different depth or different speed if you're trolling for king salmon. And then I a buddy who steelhead fishes with his fly rod, and he catches. It's unbelievable. It's just there's probably 2 more in this hole. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he catches 2 more. I'm like, I'm excited if I catch 1. Everybody talks about how the different from 0 to 1 is a longer distance from 1 to 2 in the steelhead world. But he's like a 3, 4, 5, 6 guy, and it's amazing just to watch him. And I just don't know how he's able to do that, but it's fun to watch people who just crush it, who are just able to do that, who just get dialed in, and they've specialized, I think, in that, or it's just gotten into them on a different level and just love, and they have that passion for, and it just shows, and they're able to just do things that ordinary people like me can't, but you just like to watch it.
I love it, man. Yeah. I'm thinking of my buddy, Matt. It's like, exactly like you said, it's like you don't even know what to ask, but you just hang around long enough and they'll like drop tidbits and you're like, oh, so that's why we do this, or that's how to think about this particular piece of water, or why this particular current seam would hold fish versus that, or whatever. And those people are so important. I remember my buddy before Matt, the fishiest guy I knew before I knew the fishiest guy now. I was doing a radio show in South Dakota at the time, and every Tuesday I would go into his shop. He had a taco shop that advertised with the radio show, and so I'd go and do a little interview with him, and we'd spend 10 minutes doing the interview, and then I'd spend like an hour, and we'd just sit there and just talk about deer and birds and fish. and I would do that every week, and it was like you know, going to class. I would just go and just start rambling about something, and then he would take it from there, and I would just learn so much. And yeah, I always think having those people are interesting, and also some of the stories that those people have, you know, because it's like they've just been doing it for so long and are so knowledgeable that they have some interesting stories for sure.
Yeah. Has anybody ever called you the fishiest person? Because people have called me that, and I think, oh, I'm so sorry that you don't have better done.
No doubt. Yeah, I think so, man. I hope so, at least. I know I have one buddy for sure that is always bouncing stuff off of me. Frank, if you're listening, I hope I'm the fishiest man you know. If I'm not, I'm embarrassed. No, but yeah, it's a great, you know, it's fun on all aspects to be able to receive the information and to pass it on, you know.
Right.
How about steelhead fishing in Alaska? I've heard, I've never been steelhead fishing. I've heard epic stories, and I've heard stories of epic failure and having to hit it just exactly right. What's your overall consensus of chasing steelhead?
It can probably be encapsulated in two stories. One was, it's probably about 6 years ago now. It was the first week of April, and beautiful weather, beautiful water. Water is perfect shape, and I was catching steelhead like I've never caught them before. And so I convinced my buddy from California to come up. He's a big steelhead fishing guy, or he's always wanted to catch steelhead, but California doesn't have really much. But he and I did a lot of fly fishing in California. So I said, dude, come up first weekend of April. It's going to be perfect. He came up, and the water was low and cold, and spring was about 2 weeks late. And it was frustrating. And he caught one on the first day when it was kind of rainy, but then it stopped raining. And we hadn't had any of that runoff yet. It wasn't warm enough to melt much of the snow. And so the rivers, because they're all island rivers and they don't drain massive swaths of land, so they are so much more impacted. If you have one day without rain, the river is going to drop a little bit. You have a couple days without rain, and it's going to drop to kind of that lowest level. It's going to stay there. But, you know, the fish don't really like that. They're either not going to push up from the ocean, or they're going to stay in some of these deeper holes. And if they are there, they're not really going to move too much. So when the water comes up and it's warmer, you can have awesome days when they push up. You can hit a nice school of them, and you can, you know, hit 4 or 5 out of a hole. But my buddy came up, and we got to the first day, and that was it. And then it was about a 30-minute skiff ride from town to this river. And on one of the days we were heading out there, we ran out of fuel, which is fine because I got a gas can, and so I was going to fill it up, and the motor wouldn't start. So we're out there, and we're just kind of drifting in the ocean, and we're getting like sucked out because the tide's going out. So rather than drifting towards shore, we're kind of drifting out, which is definitely not what you want. And this is a 14-foot skiff. This is not a large ocean going vessel here. So we rowed ashore, and then we hear wolves. There's a wolf pack that was kind of running around on the beaches in that area. So it was kind of cool to hear those. But we ended up someone happened to be going by, and they towed us back to town, and they ended up just being like an air bubble in a line. And so once we got back, it started right up because it had settled. So we head back out there, and still didn't catch any fish, but yeah, it can be very temperamental. Like the water's got to be perfect. You're dealing with rivers that, like I said, are not really huge rivers. So they're much more susceptible to a couple of days of no rain. If it gets cold, then, you know, it's going to be tough, but usually mid to late April is pretty awesome. But I convinced him to come up just because the year before had been really, really good, and it had been warm and everything was melted and we were in good shape. But it's a lot of fun. You're going to get some good tranquility. There's a lot of rivers that are kind of unnamed, not a lot of content out there about them. And I think that's purposeful on the part of a lot of the locals. Don't talk a whole lot about certain rivers. There's one up by Yakutat that's on everybody's radar, and it's been in magazines and whatnot. So I think because of that, people have been a little bit more tight-lipped. People talk about fishing the Tongass for steelhead, and, you know, there's some good rivers around, but it's a pretty big area, and it's kind of tough to know exactly where to go unless you live here, and then you can hear some things.
Yeah, it's fishing is that way in general, right? And then steelhead fishing, it seems like, takes it to another level with all the different issues that face steelhead fisheries.
Yeah, you're dealing with a smaller population. You know, some of these rivers are getting 400 or so fish total, you know, and that's about what that river can handle. So it's not that it's dwindled from, you know, tens of thousands. It's a small river. It's got a small run. So, you know, if you're hooking a bunch of them, or if a lot of people know about it, then you're putting a lot more pressure on it. And, you know, when you catch and release steelhead, inevitably some that are overworked, you know, might end up dying. And so you try to be as careful as possible with them. But if it's a river of 400 people, and let's say you catch 20 in a year and one of them or two of them dies, and you multiply that by 100 or so anglers, potentially, like, you could really do some damage. Well, probably not 100, but, you know, a dozen anglers, you know, taking 10 fish out of population, that's potentially pretty big. So
what's your favorite species to chase fishing wise?
I'd say steelhead, just because it has all that mystique and all that everything, but it coincides with spring. So you're coming out of the winter, it's warmer, it's light. It's just so much fun to kind of see the earth wake up and all those, you know, poetic cliches. King salmon is so much fun just because they're such big fish and they taste so good. So I guess it's a tie for there, but you can't really, you know, compare them. You know, even watching a 14-inch cutthroat trout rise to a dry fly, like, that is awesome. On the other end of the spectrum, you're pulling up a 100-pound halibut from 200 feet. It's just absolute brute force. Not at all the same, but, you know, you can't really compare. They're so different. They're just so unique and awesome in their own right.
Absolutely. Both amazing in my book. What about hunting wise? What do you find yourself going and thinking about most of the year, you know, anticipating for a hunt?
I'd say alpine black-tailed deer, just because, again, you're up in the mountains, and it's warm, it's sunny, you're just in beautiful terrain, and there's typically not a lot of people around, if anybody. You know, you just got the mountain to yourself, and you're up there with a friend, and you're just looking around and trying to get a good one. You just know the quality of meat is just unbelievable. And we just had some backstrap last night, and it's just such great quality meat. Tastes so good for you, and just makes you think of August and those warm days up in the mountains. It's so much fun. You know, I took my wife out. I actually proposed on a hunt. We took the boat south of town. We hiked up 9 miles to this peak and shot a deer, and we processed it, and I proposed. She said yes, and then we hiked out with the deer. It was pretty cool, but just a beautiful area. And yeah, the alpine it's long days and sunny and beauty and getting meat. You just can't beat that.
Not every girl's dream, but I'm glad you found the one.
Yeah, you thought it was pretty cool. So yeah, that's
good. And I don't know much about blacktail. So you're stalking them with a bow, or what's the general game plan for a blacktail hunt in near Ketchikan?
I'd like to go with a bow at some point. I bow hunt during the rut when it's a little bit more close quarters, but I just kind of get scared of being up there in those mountains. You know, even if you do get a good hit and the thing runs down to this, you know, off a cliff or something like that, and you're like, oh man, how am I going to get that thing? But just, you know, you're waking up in early morning, you know, when they're out feeding, you get, if it's been warm and sunny and there's a little bit of dew on the vegetation up there, they're just mowing that stuff down. And so you just get to a good spot and make a shot. But you typically can see, on some days you can see 5, 10, 15 bucks. It's just awesome to see that. So if you do happen to blow one stock, it's not necessarily over, but you know, you're looking at 100, 150 yard shots. Some people really like to dial up and shoot from 200, 300, but you don't necessarily need to. You can make a good move and get a good shot, but it's just kind of fun to glass and see what kind of pops up, because all of a sudden you're seeing nothing but trees, and then the exposed alpine, which is just like this carpet of green where there's not these sharp rocks. And then all of a sudden this orange looking deer, and then another one, or you see this one bedded when it moves its head and it just becomes alive with animals, and it's pretty sweet. And then you can either wait for them to stand up or try to make a stalk, but yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, sounds awesome. And how about bear hunts? And I guess what's your perspective on bear hunts as opposed to being any different than a deer hunt or something else? Because there is something more to, at least I think, to the massiveness of that animal. And it seems like, I don't think it's necessarily a hot button issue, but I guess they're trying to stop it in California and other places. But you can understand that there is a different maybe weight to that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how, I don't know. I know in Washington and Oregon and those places that are trying to get rid of them, is that maybe that's like the first starting point. You're trying to eliminate that so that you can eliminate deer hunting or hunting altogether. I'm not really sure what it is, but I think there's a lot of people who don't think that people eat the meat. And so that could be part of it. But, up here, if you kill it before June 1st, then you have to take the meat. After that, it's optional. But, it's predator control. There's plenty of them around. And I think bear meat is a pretty underappreciated meat. I tend to put it in like a bear chorizo or a bear summer sausage because it's just not nearly as good as, venison. Yeah, it is different. It is a different hunt. And I think part of that is just because it's predator versus predator. And the perception is that you want to really prove yourself and you go hunting. And I think there's also a difference between black bear hunting and brown bear hunting. Brown bear is a lot more carnivorous and they just decimate the moose calf population. Those things just get after it. Whereas black bear eat a lot more of the berries and things like that. So they're more docile and they really do a number on deer fawns when the fawns drop. But yeah, it's definitely got a different vibe. I think people see deer more as food and they're okay with that. But getting rid of bear hunting is definitely something that's on people's agenda.
And I saw one of the headlines on one of your blog posts earlier when I was looking at it was just the issue with hunter perception. Curious your thoughts and take on that general Pandora's box.
Yeah, I think social media has given us the opportunity to connect. Like, without social media, we wouldn't be talking right here, which is, great. It's a great, part of it. But I think in the need or the desire to feel validated or to grow or be an influencer or to stand out in a pretty, saturated market, is you have to do something more unique and better. And so that leads a lot of people to do questionable things. And I know I've taken a couple shots that I'm not proud of. And I look back at that, I think, dude, I'm glad that you stopped that sort of stuff because that's not the road that you want to go down. And there's a difference between getting caught up in the emotion of something versus that ends up being the norm. And that's the type of content that you make. And it doesn't really help it, or I know it doesn't help us at all when we have stuff that's portrayed on social media that can be used as ammunition against us. And so it's very difficult for us as fishermen and hunters to say, oh, it's, respecting the animal and this and that, when what we're doing is totally different. And the representation that people who don't know about hunting, if they just look at something, they think this is what it is. And it's their stereotype that they think that it is. And it's just murderous people who enjoy the killing rather than meat acquisition. And people will be receptive to hunters who say, this is why we hunt. And it reduces the carbon footprint. We're going up on the mountain. It's healthy for me. I'm taking this animal legally, clean kill. I'm taking it home. I'm not a part of the beef industry, which is gross. So I'm not participating in the methane and all that. So it's better for the earth if I hunt deer. And some people will be like, oh, that's a good point. It's a part of sustainable living to get as much food as you can by yourself in your area. That makes total sense. But then you have people making questionable ethical decisions. and celebrating it, that ends up really hurting us as a population of hunters, because rather than cite the person who talks about sustainability and reducing carbon footprint, we get these people who are doing horrible things, making bad shots, not honoring the animal. And so that really hurts. And that's why a lot of people get traction when it comes to shutting hunting down, because it's seen as some sort of barbaric thing that only psychopaths do.
Yeah, and it's interesting, as a sportsman and a hunter and an angler myself, just to play a little bit devil's advocate for the sake of it, because it's odd, because all that is true, but I guess it doesn't have to be here or there. It can also, all that can also be true, and it can also be true to enjoy the pursuit of that animal, right? To enjoy the actual hunt and to enjoy the activity of the hunt. All of that can still be true, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then even if someone can totally get it wrong too, like someone can label you as one of those types and you're not that at all. So it's, to get an absolute this or that when you're on social media is just ridiculous, and it is perception versus reality. And so I think, as long as you and people who know you have the right impression, that's all you can really do with. Otherwise, you're worried too much about what other people think.
Curious, and then I'll kind of start to wind her down here. I saw another thing on your blog that piqued my interest that I didn't dive into, is some of the wolf management stuff going on, I assume, in Prince of Wales. Is that right?
Yeah.
Give me a rundown on that topic and your thoughts, I guess.
So
from a broad perspective, layman view.
Yeah. So Prince of Wales has kind of been the hotbed for wolf preservation. A lot of special interest groups have put a lot of money into lawsuits and whatnot to try to protect the wolves on Prince of Wales Island. Previously, it was a subspecies, and that wolves can't swim and that they don't eat deer, which is just like crazy. But of course they eat deer. Yes, they can swim, all that stuff. And a lot of it was just people judging wolves by lower 48 standards, and what they knew about wolves were, that they were eradicated from Colorado and that they were nearly eradicated from Wyoming. And so I think their hearts are in the right spot. They think, well, let's protect the wolves on Prince of Wales before they're gone. And I absolutely have no problem with that whatsoever. However, the difference is you're dealing with an island that has over 900 miles of coastline and less than 5,000 people. And if you look at the network of roads, there's nothing comparatively. There's a lot of logging and whatnot. And so part of it became, as a way of preventing logging, let's try to protect the wolves. So it's been a back and forth. And it kind of came to a head a couple of years ago when there was an estimated, I think, 165 wolves on the island. Locals thought there were way more. Trappers got 161 or something like that. And so the news across the country was that trappers had killed all but 3 or 5 of the wolves, which ended up being not true because it was an incorrect estimate. Because it's not the biologist's fault, because you're talking about a massive island and the forest is so dense up here. There's no way that you can count them like you can. You can fly overhead with a helicopter and you can count the wolves in the packs and in Wyoming, Colorado, places like that, but you can't do that here. So they did the best they could getting an estimate. The estimate was wrong. The country goes crazy because all but 4 were trapped. But then the next season they got over 60, which proved that there were a bunch of wolves that weren't counted. So it's a continual back and forth with trying to protect the wolves on Prince of Wales Island. The locals are saying that the deer populations are way down, and one of the culprits is wolves. Some people exclusively blame the wolves when the reality is, you got to have good habitat. So logging is having an impact. There has been a couple bad winters, which is going to have an impact on the deer population, plus the wolves. And so locals are more concerned about the deer population, which is a massive food source for a lot of the locals because beef is so expensive. It's just part of the lifestyle appears is to get the deer. But then, people want to, protect the wolves. And like I said, their hearts are in the right spot, but it's just a different dynamic. And if you judge that by lower 48 standards, you're going to miss out on a lot of the nuance that shows that there's no way that you're going to trap all the wolves on the island. I mean, it's just way too big an island. It's way too wild. But they're trying to protect, and that's just kind of the short version of a very hot topic issue.
I understand. And not only in Prince of Wales, right? It seems like there's issues and that general, not scheme, but the general plan. Yeah, it seems like it's going on in other places as well. And there's a give and a take to everything, right? So it's interesting. I'm glad that I asked and I got a little bit of an answer, because just briefly looking at the article headlines, like you said, it's so misleading to look at an article and without even having any context. I just looked at your blog and it's like, 161 of 164 or whatever it may be wolves trapped. I was honestly figuring that your opinion was going to be on the other side of that, just based on that article headline. So it's interesting to get that perspective, I guess.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, that when they did get, I believe when they got those 64 wolves, it was in 2 weeks. So the fact that they were able to get that many wolves in that short of time just shows that, man, there's a lot of stinking wolves out there, especially if it's, a massive island. If you're able to get that many wolves in that short of time, that shows that the population is pretty robust.
Right. Right. Hey, interesting stuff. Jeff, I appreciate the time, man. Thanks for reaching out. Enjoyed talking with you, and hope, what's coming up next for you?
Got May coming up, so the spring bear hunt, then school's going to be out, and so it's going to be just a fishing bonanza, and then deer, and just keep writing stories, and actually my wife and I are also building a home. Well, we're not doing it. We don't have Google out there on our phones as we're trying to do it, but we're building a house. That'll be pretty sweet. That's going to be happening while the summer's going on, while we're doing some fishing. So
awesome. Love it, man. Well, best of luck. Hopefully you find a bear, and fishing bonanza sounds even better. So, all right, there you have it. Episode 45 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors in the books. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, make sure you're subscribed to this podcast. We have 2 episodes that drop each and every month on the first and third Friday of the month. Check out buffaloroamer.com. You can find out more info and find out about some of our hosted trips there. Also, make sure you go check out Jeff's podcast, the Mediocre Alaskan Podcast. He's got a lot of cool and interesting stuff on there. Go check out his book, A Miserable Paradise, and go get outside, get some fresh air. Talk to you next time.